Okay. Okay. Okay, then, as Dean is trying to join, I think we can start. Pete.
Sure.
So I'm just going to, I just want to start asking you about your journey and how you have reached to this place. I know you work a lot on like men masculinities. So first, if you can tell me more about, where you grew up, how did this shape you? How did you get into photography? How did you get into video? And why are you doing what you're doing today?
Sure, sure. Well, hi everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. I did want to say my friend and colleague Gael Almeida had an emergency come up that she really needed to attend to, so unfortunately she couldn't join us today, and she was apologetic for that. But she certainly needed to be where she is, so it'll just be me. I hope that'll be okay. But to answer your question, Reem, I grew up mostly living with my mother. My parents were split up, and my sister and I grew up with my mother, who was a newspaper photographer. So I grew up around photography in dark rooms. When I was coming up, my mother was still shooting film, so I grew up in dark rooms. She was a photojournalist for local newspapers. She worked in a city in Massachusetts where I grew up, where there were quite a lot of difficulties in that city at the time. It had been a relatively, fairly working class, relatively, stable economic environment. A lot of that dissipated as factories and manufacturing and things went away, and there was a lot of difficulty that arose in the city. My mother was chronicling all of that, so I grew up in that type of environment. And when I went on to university, I began to get deeply interested I was very interested in history, but I was particularly interested in conflict histories, conflicts that were transpiring in various parts of the world. The September 11th, I'm turning 42 this year. I was 19 when the September 11th attacks happened. So of course I was coming alive as sort of a conscious being at this monumental time in history, where the United States was considering wars and engagement in places, and I really wanted to better understand what was happening in those places. So I became very interested in the history of contemporary ethnic conflicts, nation states, challenges in post-colonial environments between sort of nations, communities of people, all confined to parameters of one state, why things were transpiring. So I became a journalist initially, a reporter and an editor, and then became a photographer along that way. And I focused my attention as best I could on the underpinnings of conflicts. Why were these conflicts transpiring? In addition to photographing the conflicts themselves, the armed aspects of those conflicts, I was really interested in what was causing fundamentally. And the more that I photographed conflicts and wars, inevitably you're seeing a lot of men participating as active as combatants. In the combatant role, of course, is overwhelmingly dominated by men. And I began to really wonder, particularly in environments where soldiers, in cases, or armed people, rebels or insurgents, were participating in particularly egregious forms of violence. And I started to wonder what in fact was transpiring in their kind of gendered world to give rise to this particular type of brutality. So I began I sort of began that work intellectually in university, with some interest in contemporary kind of the anthropology of masculinity, and then in my conflict studies and my conflict experience, trying to better understand the sort of male gender dimensions of why we were seeing the violence that we have. And I've been following that in various ways, for the last, 12 or 15 years or so. And I continue to do it up to now.
Pete,
hello, Dean.
Sorry for the challenges joining you, but I'm delighted to be here. And, I get to chat with you a little bit about the WILPF photography competition this year. Because I was struggling with tech issues, I'm not sure if we were able to kind of introduce the broader set of issues around the competition itself. but in case we didn't, right? Okay.
We hadn't yet. Reem had just sort of asked me to tell
Right.
a little bit about myself and how I've arrived
Good.
where I am.
And so maybe just to divert for a sec, if we could, and then I want to come back and give Reem space to ask some follow-up questions, and I also have a few. I just wanted to let everyone know that this is a conversation connected to an international photography competition that we at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and particularly our project related to engaging men and mobilizing men to support feminist peace, are launching or have just launched a few weeks ago. But it's the second one. Pete chaired the jury last year. We'll be doing the same this year. So that's the broader context to the conversation. I serve as one of the project leads on this work that's happening across many countries, mostly conflict and post-conflict countries. I'm sure will tell us his experiences shooting photography or taking pictures in some of those places. But, you know, it's every sort of Afghanistan through to Niger, Colombia, Yemen, a whole range of countries that are at the moment in important conflict. And we want to offer some images of men not involved in conflict in many ways, right? And so the theme for this year's conversation, which we'll talk about more in a moment, is men and love. And so, Peter, I'm dying to get your thoughts in a moment as to kind of how we landed on that theme. It was a suggestion you made. But for the moment, having provided that little bit of context, I wanted to turn it back to Reem, if Reem, you want to jump in. Looks like not. Okay.
Do we have you, Reem?
I know Reem had another emergency she was attending to. Reem is currently in Cairo, having had to flee Khartoum a few months ago in the midst of the civil war there. And so I think she's dealing with lots of pressing issues. But yeah, Pete, let's go back to some of the questions we were about to explore related to your particular journey. And thanks for that background. I'm curious, when you think back to the time we spent in East Africa, you shot some really iconic images from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan. What were you seeing in terms of the landscape of images around men, masculinities, and conflict?
Well, I think something that I noticed then and continue to notice is that there is, there's a tremendous amount of imagery of men's participation in armed violence that doesn't necessarily have a particular lens of analysis with respect to anything related to the gender components or the sociological components of that. We see, the world is awash of images of, mostly men out in combat situations, enacting violence, however they justify, most participation in violence in the minds of the people who are involved in it is defensive violence. I mean, there's very few actors out there that say that they're committing offensive violence. It's always in reaction to something. But we see a tremendous amount of images of that. I mean, I think perhaps if there's one thing that we've become desensitized to, it's images of men with guns in various parts of the world enacting violence for various reasons in a war context. But I hadn't seen much photographic imagery that was sort of attempting to somewhat make sense of this. Felt like sort of a lot of the analysis rested on things that appear somewhat tenuous in my mind, that is sort of a presumption that there's a sort of intrinsic male predilection to participate in violence that's sort of due to a natural order of things, which, to some degree is true. But I think those of us who are interested in kind of understanding the social aspects of gender, which we've done certainly in many cases with respect to women and girls and their experiences in any variety of things, not just in a conflict context. I didn't feel that there was as much present there in terms of images and sort of there was written material to some degree, that was attempting to examine this kind of phenomenon, but I didn't feel that there was much on the photographic or visual landscape that was attempting to make sense of it in a way that felt resonant to me anyway.
And so I'm curious, man, what did you do through your work to address that sort of monolithic representation of men and conflict? And, you know, if you don't mind perhaps sharing a few examples, a few situations. I know you took a very powerful body of, took a whole series of pictures in Ukraine as well. So it's not just East Africa, Central Africa that you've been taking pictures in, but it's, it's global. So, yeah, any moments in that work that stand out to you where you felt like you were able to convey a different message?
Well, I'd say to be as brief as I can, where I really began the work photographically anyway was in the wake of what were known as mobile military tribunals in Eastern Congo that were aimed ostensibly really at instances of mass rape, which, as many people know, has been a sort of a very dark hallmark of some of the conflict in the eastern part of Congo. And they had initiated these mobile military tribunals as a way to try to establish some accountability and curtail that as a phenomenon. And I went on assignment for the Associated Press to photograph the tribunals. And while I was there, I was living and working in South Sudan at the time. And was photographing a lot of conflict dynamics there, and was thinking, on the heels of my studies and this interest that I've had about what the sort of motivating factors of men participating in violence had been. So I went to photograph the tribunals, and while I was there, the tribunals were fascinating. They were really important. They were occurring in public view. People were able to stand and watch. Community members were able to stand and watch for one of the first times in history, groups of armed men who usually operate with impunity, actually, being held accountable for that. And as I watched it, and a number of the people, a number of the male men that were, they weren't really men technically, because what I'm going to say is that a number of the people who had participated in this violence were in fact juveniles, and others were right on the cusp, 18, 19, 20 years old, very young men. And as I watched and I kind of considered the significance of what was happening and the importance of what was happening, I couldn't help but sort of be struck by the fact that there was so much tragedy in this. Obviously, the survivors who, very bravely came and testified and participated in this incredible way, they were enduring the residual trauma of what they'd experienced. And as I looked at particularly these young men who were, and boys who had been involved in this, I thought, there's just a profound, robust sense of tragedy in all. How did these boys end up in this situation? And it sort of comported to it. It was consistent to a degree with some influential things that I was able to study in the School of International Service at American University. That, when we talk of gender violence, we often think of that as synonymous with the experience of girls and women, either in sort of an intimate partner setting or in an armed conflict setting. But in fact, if you step back and you look, it's like, both sexes, to speak broadly, are having their own respective experiences on the basis of their sex. And women and girls are experiencing one thing. Of course, everybody's experiencing an atmosphere of violence and displacement, but women and girls are experiencing particular types of difficulties that often encompass, sexual aspects of violence. But boys and men are also being, for instance, forcefully conscripted into armed factions, participating, forcefully having to commit horrible acts that are deeply traumatizing to them as they are being brought into what's perceived as their role in armed conflict. So I did want to begin to examine, why, to some extent, were we seeing very gratuitous violence. So I spent the following 2 years with a grant from the Open Society Foundation, really spending a lot of time with men under arms, trying to understand.
Great, thanks, Peter. That image you describe, or that moment you describe of, all of this complexity in one place, and certainly the images that I've seen. I remember seeing your work exhibited at the global conference to address sexual violence in London now a decade ago. Incredibly powerful. prompted the kinds of questions in me that you were asking at the time. How did we get here? What explains this? And what might we do about it? Which maybe takes me to the next question, right? So our project is embedded in an organization that's been around for 108 years, established in 1915, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Just 4 years ago, WILPF launched this initiative to really engage and mobilize men so that men actively support gender equality and women's peacemaking around the world. So, we, in our first iteration of this competition, were interested in images that showed militarized masculinities and alternatives to it. This year, the theme for the photography competition is in times of increasing conflict and polarization, we're looking for images that explore the theme of men and love. And I'm curious about how that came to be. What was your thinking when you suggested that? And what are you hoping to see?
Well, I think in part, for those, just so you know, Dean, your audio is a little bit spotty. It's kind of in and out. So for anybody that may not have been able to understand, the theme of this last contest that WILPF ran was militarized masculinities and alternatives. And essentially what that meant was, how are militarized notions of what be a masculine figure, what are those things and what are potential alternatives to those things. And as we discussed doing a second iteration of this contest, I felt, and many of us sort of agreed, that we wanted to pursue something that felt simpler and more accessible in terms of people's understanding. And I think that, as I've been saying, we've seen so many images of men participating in violence of varying forms, and in my view, what we call masculinity or masculinities around the world in all the ways that they're conceived in the various environments where they exist and are cultivated, a great degree of that identity is fundamentally predicated on a sort of defensive notion, a stoic notion, a separation of a person who identifies as male, their sort of emotional worlds. It's kind of a guarded identity. But I think at a deeply fundamental level, prior to the onset or the cultivation of that prescribed way of being as a male, there is, of course, a very human, emotional landscape. And at the center of that landscape, for, I believe, all people in the world, is a deep desire to give and receive love. And that's become so profoundly obfuscated. It's become shielded and difficult to understand, in my opinion, because of the prescribed notions of how males ought to express themselves in the world. And of course, there's tremendous variation in the ways that men are prescribed to perform their role. But a consistent thing that I've seen throughout the world and in the area where I grew up, and the value system that was imparted to me in large part, both through my community and popular culture, was to be hiding a lot of what you feel. And I think that if we want to progress in some ways, and we really want to see, a kind of a world where we're not necessarily contending with the degree of violence and aggression and social malady that we see, not from all men, but from some men, and they can become defining in our perceptions of men, we ought to really engage with the idea of how and what men love. It seems so simple, but I think it's important.
No, I remember. Thank you, Pete. I remember when you first proposed it, resonated with many of my colleagues at the League for Peace and Freedom. Can you hear me, by the way?
It's really in and out.
How about if I bring that a little closer? Is that any better?
Much better.
Good. So what I was saying is, when we first spoke about it, it resonated immediately. And it resonated with many of my colleagues at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I think there was, there's an appetite for exploring precisely these issues. So kind of if we want to see men support women's rights, support gender equality, and live fuller lives, it's a conversation and that we desperately need to have. And I think a range of emotions that are rich and ripe for exploration. I was going for a ride with my daughter along the coastline here in Cape Town, and I was thinking about, well, what is it that I love? And if I were to take images of that, what would that include? And I was thinking, well, part of it is place. This city that I grew up in, with all of its challenges, place I absolutely love. Partly because of the environment that is under threat. And so, it sort of opened up for me questions of climate, landscape. It wasn't just restricted to the love that I feel for my family, and in that, especially for my daughter, who was doing most of the work to get us up the hill on the bicycle. And so, yeah, very keen to see what emerges. And I think it's a bold theme. I'm glad you've put together such an amazing jury to help us select the images. And maybe you could say a few words about the jury that you have put together.
Yeah. No, I feel really grateful to have been able to gather a number of colleagues from, really quite different types of backgrounds, all of whom have really admirable expertise in the world of the visual arts. So we have Azu Nwambogu, who is the founder of the African Artists Foundation. He also is the founder of the Lagos Photography Festival, an incredible, insightful, reflective observer of the arts. So I'm happy to have him. Jahi Chikwendu, who's an extraordinary photographer, staff photographer for the Washington Post, has photographed all kinds of really remarkable, very sensitive stories, both in the United States and abroad. We have Gael Almeida, who is part of the National Geographic Society, who runs all of National Geographic's grants programs in Latin America. And Gael grew up in a very artistic household. Her mother is a photographer, has wonderful sensibilities in terms of visual language. We have Sarah Lean, who is the former director of photography at National Geographic magazine, and herself an extraordinary photographer for many years. And Ismail Firdos, who is really a contemporary working photographer, also with incredibly sensitive visual and narrative sensibilities. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone, Dean, am I?
Yeah.
So I think between these jurors, we have a wide range of visual expertise, an incredibly honed notion of unconventional narratives. Some of these, certainly someone like Sarah and Ismail come from the world of photojournalism. Jahi, of course, comes from the world of photojournalism. Gael comes from a broader storytelling background where she works with scientists and she works with visual storytellers, and Azu, who works in the museum context a lot. So I think it's going to be really interesting discussions among these jurors. And if I can say more just about the theme, I think what also really attracts me about the idea of men and love is that it's so variable, and we've really wanted, on both iterations of this contest, we've really wanted people to interpret these themes in whichever way they really see fit. So, the concept of men and love can be applied so widely, familial love, romantic love of place, love of engagement. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can interpret this. And that's, I think, really where things become most interesting, is when artists and photographers and people have flexibility to interpret things in a way that resonates with them.
No, absolutely. And I'm keen to just go back to our previous contest for a sec. We had 3 photographers who we selected to kind of really showcase their work, right? Carolina Navas, from Colombia, her remarkable set of images of young men in some ways navigating what it means to be young men and to experience joy and freedom of expression. Pedram Pianem, who had a very powerful and quite disturbing set of images of young men being socialized into the kind of everyday experience of exposure to weapons, and in this case, automatic weapons in the classroom. And then Lauren Justice's very powerful set of images of men who had assaulted their partners, been convicted and mandated to participate in battery intervention programs. And we had lots of other really, I think memorable images which received kind of a special acknowledgement as well. And I wanted to just ask you to share a little bit with anyone who is planning to submit images. What kinds of criteria might you and the judges be using as you look at images? Any insights that you want to share with potential photographers listening in today?
I think we've intentionally designed this contest to have a wide latitude for the submission of all kinds of images. So there's a category for more conventional documentary photography or photojournalism, but we also have an open format category, which includes just about anything that is the photographic medium that people feel is fits within this theme. So. I think I come from the background of having been a photojournalist. So for many, many years, I abided by the sort of standards that are enacted, most notably by the World Press Photo Organization in terms of, what the rules are, the ethical rules are in terms of staging and not removing any material content from any images. That's the background that I come from. But I myself have sort of evolved in different directions, because I think sometimes the photographic medium, for a long time in my mind, photography and photojournalism were the same thing. But, photography is so expansive and it can be utilized in such powerful ways that don't necessarily conform to this strict notion of documentary photography or photojournalism. So we really want to make, if you are making photographs that you feel address this question, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a series. We do have room for series photographs if you feel like there's narrative structure or concept structure that is best executed through a series of photographs. Single images, anything that you feel kind of represents this idea. How do men love? What do they love? What does that love mean? I write a lot in conjunction with my pictures. I think, having context for images is incredibly important. So, I think we don't want to be prescriptive, really. We've tried to give people as much room to think about this in their own ways. And, we have admissibility for a wide range of photography. So I hope that encourages a wide range of submissions.
Great, thanks, Pete. And I just want to check and see if anyone online wants to ask any questions of Pete. They could be conceptual, technical in nature. Let us know if you've got any questions you'd like Pete to address.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything? Okay, well, feel free to drop any questions in that you may have. Pete, looked like you had some thoughts you wanted to share.
Oh, I guess I don't know. I guess I could just continue to think about, the adaptability of this. And I think it's what I like about this subject, what's kept me motivated and kept me making work about it, is that it's like everywhere and nowhere in a way. If you kind of look around, I don't think we're particularly trained, as I mentioned. For many years, I felt like there was kind of an absence of any visual representations of these kinds of inquiries about, motivating factors of how men structure their lives. So in part, in addition to the war work that I did, I also did a large body of work over several years for National Geographic magazine about boyhood. And how boyhood is sort of unfolding in various parts of the world, and the value systems and the environmental factors that inform the way that we raise we raise boys. And it's fascinating that it's something that in my mind feels so kind of overlooked, despite its omnipresence in so many places. And it was such a rewarding experience to me. Grateful to like Sarah Lean, who was the photo director at that time, who allowed me the opportunity to move around with such a wide berth, to be able to look at the varied ways that that boys are being brought up. And I think it's really a fascinating subject that I continue to find so rewarding.
And Peter, I just want to return us for a sec to the body of work from Ukraine. Anything there that connects with this theme? Obviously, a lot of what you were documenting there connected with the theme of militarization. But any part of that you think connects with this theme of men and love?
Well, I mean, I think that these are the complicated intersectional dimensions of any conversation like this, which is that I think that there's arguably a case to be made that some men's participation in organized violence is in fact motivated by what they might explain to be love. Love for their families, love for their communities, love for their nation. That is what drives them out there. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's a long, complicated conversation that's all very relative, but very few people in the world are convinced that the violence that they're perpetrating is offensive, or that they are the one that most, if by the telling of individuals and people who are participating, almost every act of violence is a reprisal. It's a reaction to something that the other did. And often that participation, of course, it's dangerous. People could, you yourself, if you're participating in that, could be killed. So there's a view, in a way, that it is a form of love to participate in that way, protecting your, being willing to sacrifice. So, that was the crux of what I was looking at in Ukraine was, what does boyhood look like in an environment? This was prior to the 2022 Russian invasion, but still the conflict in the East was alive and had been happening since 2014. So it was a conflict atmosphere at that time. And, what does boyhood look like in an environment with a looming prospect of territorial incursion and war by an adversary, basically Russia? And I think that a lot of what was being discussed by the instructors in these camps that I was attending was love of country, and the willingness to protect that country. So it's there's a lot of layers to how this can be read, depending on how you think about it. And I don't necessarily think that we should expect, nor would I encourage people to simply interpret a contest about men and love to be a contest that simply is about very kind of conventional notions of what love might look like. It's people should feel free to wade into that complexity.
No, exactly. And I'm really eager to see that complexity. And I think it's precisely that complexity that will make for compelling exhibitions. We hope to exhibit the body of work that emerges from this competition globally in a range of different kind of global spaces. For instance, at the Nobel Peace Prize Awards, to do something in Oslo, to do something at the African Union. They just convened their third conference on positive masculinities here in South Africa last week. And to imagine showing these images in places like that get people to think about the issues. Here in Cape Town, we want to do something downtown, a public exhibit that pushes people to think about precisely the complexities and nuance, to ask themselves difficult questions about how they relate to this theme and to the themes of conflict. And, as you talked about the ways in which people in Ukraine and elsewhere have seen their involvement and their willingness to use violence as a manifestation of love, I was immediately thinking of Nelson Mandela in his famous Rivonia treason trial speech, where he says, we've been forced to engage in armed conflict because the apartheid state has brutalized Black people in South Africa to the extent that we can no longer use peaceful means. And I think a lot of armed groups have in some ways been stripped of that agency. If we think about, revolutionary movements in parts of the world, I think there was much more space to think about those as a commitment to freedom, to families, to the things that you've just described. And so it's very interesting to hear you lay that out and to invite people to grapple with that complexity as they think about images that they want to submit that speak to this theme of men and love in times of conflict and increasing polarization. So I want to just check and see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing them on my small screen.
And
Yes.
and team, if there's anything that you'd like to contribute or address, or
I'm noticing that many of the guests joining are actually photographers, so their usernames are like a name and then photography. So if you can just write in the chat, where you're from, what are the themes that you work on, if you can tell us a little about yourself. We can also host, so I can also, if one of you has a question, you can also send me a request, and I'm happy to bring you on the stage as a speaker for a few minutes. So if you want to request that, feel free to do that. And again, we're very happy to be here with Pete Muller. We're talking about our photography collaboration. We're accepting submissions right now. This year, our theme is Men in Love. And you can find all the information on our website. If you can find all the information in the Linktree link on our profile, or I keep writing our website in the chat box.
Whoops, Reem, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if that's just me.
Oh, you couldn't hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, yeah. So I was just asking if anyone wants to come to the stage to share a few comments or ask a question. If you basically send a request, I'm happy to host you on the stage. So to do that, you just basically request to speak. Or you can write in the chat box that you're interested to come to the stage, and then I can request to have you on the stage as a speaker. So we're all, new to this Instagram live, but it's very nice. It's very engaging. I hope you keep doing it, Pete. I see you're a natural. You managed to get in very smoothly.
your instructions. Thank you, Reem.
Dean struggled a little bit, but yeah, I think you just I think it's always better on a phone or an iPad. Actually, you can't do it from. I think it's a bit difficult from like a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we know I'm seeing just a lot of photographers again. Just I wanted to say thank you to Pete for being with us. We're talking about our photography collaboration. We're accepting submissions right now. The theme this year is Men in Love, and we're just having a conversation with Pete about his work and about the theme and about what we want to see. And Pete, I just want to share good news that we're already receiving submissions, and they're very interesting.
Great.
I'm not going to the topics, or the focus. Surprise.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yes, but very, very, very good. And from my conversation with Dean, we're just very impressed at how people interpret the theme. And this is the point. We want people to see the theme from different angles and to interpret it the way they want to. And just we're expecting to get diverse submissions as a result.
I think maybe I'll say this is that, in one of the slides that we made, you'd taken a quote from me saying that discussions about love are sort of one of the last conversational taboos. And I really think that that's true in so many instances. I mean, when I think of my upbringing, I can't think of a single conversation concerted conversation that I had with friends, with my parents, about my own notions of what love was. It was sort of, it was in the ether to a degree, but it was certainly nowhere part of the conscious conversation that was sort of imparted to me as things that I ought to have some understanding of. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that that's something that I encounter.
We lost you, Pete. So yeah, it's loading. So, but I think it'll come back.
And Reem, while we're waiting for Pete, do you want to say a few words about the kind of the basics? So you mentioned the submission due date, the prize amount, anything like that you'd like to share?
Yes, absolutely. So the photography collaboration, and you'll find information on our Instagram account, our website. We have plenty of information. The deadline is coming up. It's the 1st of January. And like I said, the theme is men and love. We are going to have prizes for the winners. So the first prize is the equivalent of $1,000, and then the runner-ups are going to get $600. And it's basically we are accepting submissions in different formats. So it could be portrait, documentary, different formats. Okay, I'm going to invite Pete again. Sorry, he dropped off. And yeah, and the whole submission process is available on our website. You're going to find the link in our link tree. It's linked here in our bio, and it's a very smooth process. We try to make it as easy as possible. You go to the website, you can find the submission guidelines over there in Spanish, in English, and in French, and then you're going to be able to access the form on the website. So all the submission process is on our website. It's a friendly and accessible process. And again, everything is in English, Spanish, and French. And yeah, so the deadline is the 1st of January. So we are really looking forward to getting submissions from photographers from all over the world.
Great. And Pete, you cut off just as you were talking. You were sort of wondering if other people had had the same experience of, as you put it, a real paucity of discussions about love and intimacy amongst men. And I was immediately reminded I used to run groups with young men in San Francisco at Mission High School. And we used to meet on a Monday morning. And right before we met, there was a group of young women who met. And they came out of the room talking, animated, excited. And we went in all very somber, quiet. It was very hard to get anyone to talk. And one of the young men, Mario was his name, said,
you may want to move.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's...
There we go. No, sure. And so as the young women were leaving the room, having just had a hour-long discussion about gender and women's rights and relationships, we went in, a group of about 8 to 10 young men, and it was quiet and somber. No one really said much. And then one of the young men said, like, what's going on here? He said, the young women, they were just in here talking, and I know that they told what it was like to hold hands, what it was like to go out on a date. He said, the only thing we get to talk about is whether we'd had sex. He said, everything else is off limits. And there was a tremendous kind of melancholy to him as he said this, right? The sense of loss. And I think what he was asking for in many ways was an opportunity to talk about his hopes, his aspirations, his ideas about what love could mean. And so I'm delighted that we're working with you over the next few months to explore this theme. I really, really want to appreciate you for finding the time now. I know you're in the middle of production of an important film, and we are very, very grateful to have your years of expertise and all of the followers that you have on Instagram who've joined us for this discussion. So just want to thank you and thank everyone else for joining, and give the floor to you and Reem for any closing comments you'd like to make.
Yes, you can go first, Pete.
Oh no, I don't have much. I think I've said plenty. Thank you all for joining us. Really look forward to seeing what comes our way in terms of submissions. Be bold and think innovatively and creatively, and we can't wait to see what you've got. Really. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Again, deadline is coming up 1st of January. The theme is Men and Love. You can interpret it the way you want. This collaboration is open to photographers from all over the world and in different categories. I will keep posting the information here on our Instagram account, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, and our Facebook, and everything is also available on our website. Please keep checking out our Instagram page and on our other social media accounts for updates and for information. We have an amazing jury. One of them was supposed to join us today, Gail Almeida. She couldn't, but we have an amazing jury. Sarah Lynn, Gail Almeida, Ismail Ferdos. I see one of his friends joined actually. So yeah, so I'm very happy that you're here, and this live is going to be available on our Instagram account, so it's going to be saved. And we have all the information, like I said, on our website, and you can always send a private message if you want more information or if you have any thoughts that you want to share. And I just want to thank you again for your time, and thank you, Pete, for making this happen. This is all our time, but it will not be our last.
Thank you. Thank you for setting everything up. All right, buddy.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Reem. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everyone. Bye.